So, what is a water diversion? Kristen, who's following me, suggested that we talk about what that means, because some people don't understand or might be confused that, you know, if you have a creek or a stream, a spring, or even just a seep where you might see a few drops of water coming out of from underneath a rock in the mountains, and you make a little check dam and take that water through a half-inch poly tube to wherever it may be that you want to take it, that is a water diversion. This is a fancy one that I pulled off the web. It's got some gasoline-powered pumps associated with it, but it doesn't need to be this fancy to be a water diversion. Here's another one. So here's some poly tubing. If this looks familiar to you, you're probably diverting water. And so pay attention, because increasingly when law enforcement authorities make contact with individuals in Humboldt County in the woods or on your homestead, they're not just focusing on plants that may be there. They're going to ask you increasingly where your water comes from and whether you have a permit to pull out to show them that you are in compliance. And so that's why it pays to look into this. We are moving toward a regulatory framework as legalization looms on the horizon. And at that point, they may completely disregard the plants and go straight to asking for your water permit or your grading permit. And if you have it to show them and pull out, they may turn around and leave. And how great would you feel at that point? Pretty darn good. So compliance is really an issue on the horizon. 2 agencies regulate water diversion: the State Water Board and the Department of Fish and Wildlife, which used to be called Fish and Game. The first 2 permits we're going to discuss are the Statement of Water Diversion and Use, which is a free permit. You just need to fill out a 4-page form online, and you can send it in via email. The second permit that you may or may not need is a $500 registration of small domestic use. Let's talk a little bit more about these. The first one, the Statement of Water Diversion and Use, is what you will need if you are doing any kind of water diversion from off your property. I'm going to address in the next slide if you are diverting a stream that's on your property. So technically you need one if you're diverting water of any kind. Filing a statement is not evidence of a water right in itself, but it is evidence of compliance with applicable water laws. It can be also used as proof to establish claim to water later on, should the water supply being diverted be officially divided up among users. And so it pays to stake your claim early, because likely later on somebody else will. Here's the exemption slide. You do not need to file with the State Water Board. And again, all this information is in the handout, so you don't need to take notes. If you're diverting from a spring that would not otherwise flow off of your property, would it not be diverted? And unless you live on a giant quarter section, 160 acres or something like that, where there might be springs that pop up that don't quite make it off your property, you're going to need the statement. Anyway, it's free. It took me about half an hour to fill one out the other day. So go check it out. If the stream wouldn't flow off your property and you have less than, say, a 4-acre vegetable garden, then you don't need one, but most people aren't farming that big an area. The State Water Board staff is not going to analyze the contents of your permit when they receive it. They're just going to file it away and note where you are diverting it from, because that's the all-important issue to them. Later on, if that stream, spring, or creek is divided up, they will look into it because you have established that you have a claim to that. And so that behooves you. What happens if you don't file? Well, the State Water Board will send you a notice advising you have 30 days to file the statement. After that 30 days, if you don't file, they will fine you $1,000 plus $500 for each additional day of water diversion that follows after that. I've read in the newspaper not too long ago that they hired 8 new enforcement agents just to go after these illegal diversions this year because water is becoming such an issue with the drought. Here's the second permit. I think I said it was $500. It's $250 for a 5-year registration. This permit, the registration of small domestic use, allows storage of up to 3 million gallons of water in a pond or other storage system. So it pertains not per se to the diversion itself, it's more a storage permit. Again, it's with the State Water Board, and if you Google State Water Board, you'll find your way to the permit section. Again, this is all in the handbook. If you don't register your pond, you might attract the attention of law enforcement authorities. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife is the third and final source of permitting. The second source of permitting is the third permit we're going to talk about. This is kind of a big one. It's known in the parlance of the agency as the 1602 permit. It typically applies to the larger diversions. It's likely that if you are diverting a seep coming out from under a rock somewhere, that you will not need to proceed to the full-blown agreement, LSA agreement, lake or stream bed alteration, that will follow once you file the Fish and Wildlife permit. This should be the third, really your last stop for a water diversion issue, because this permit, when you file the form for this permit, they're going to ask you whether you have filed with the State Water Board the free permit, which is the Statement of Water Diversion and Use. The registration, which pertains to storage, is not really their focus. It's that registration that should be your first stop in permitting a water diversion, because without it, you can't get the Fish and Wildlife permit for lake and stream bed alteration. So, if the law enforcement authorities do show up at your property and they've identified you as a big grow or have legal compliance issues, it's a possibility that an agent from Fish and Wildlife will be along with them, and he may inquire of you whether you have a LSA 1602 permit. If you pull out your State Water Board registration, the free permit, and he looks at the size of your activities, he may decide that your diversion doesn't fall under their radar of enforcement. He may follow your water line to the source to take a look at it for himself. He may already have done that, which might have been what triggered the visit in the first place. But go after the State Water Board permit first. It's free, it's 4 pages. And if you're doing a larger diversion, you can always call the Department of Fish and Wildlife. They're right down the street from my office in Old Town. They're on 2nd Street over by the corner of G. There's a friendly agent on staff who, just like at the county, will answer anonymous questions if you describe your diversion, and he will tell you if the process that he thinks you need to follow, and it's worth a call. It only takes 5 minutes, and I suggest doing it. So the legal definition for what triggers a need for the permit is where water diversion changed to a year-round or seasonal creek, including culvert installation or dumping of debris, soil, gravel, or rock, is determined by Fish and Wildlife to substantially adversely affect fish or wildlife resources. And so that's why some diversions will not require a 16-0 permit, whereas all diversions will require the free registration of small domestic use from the State Water Board. Fish and Wildlife also, the 16-0 permit also pertains to culverts. This slide I took directly off their website. After I was a farmer, but before I became an attorney, I did a spec home, I did some building and remodeling, and I had to put in a culvert almost exactly like this one over what was listed on a map as a blue line creek, which is a year-round creek. It's a solid blue line on a map as opposed to a dotted line which denotes a seasonal creek. I was told to do that I would need a 16-0 permit, 1602. I didn't know what it was, but I called the number. They walked me through the procedure. I'm no Picasso, but I pulled out a white piece of paper and a pencil, asked them if I could draw a picture of the procedure that I wanted to install a culvert just like this one for the driveway, and lo and behold, I got the permit based off of a pencil drawing that I did on my kitchen table. It simply showed the larger rock that was going to be around the culvert. I used a hydraulic tamping machine to put gravel over that, and then the road went over that. I can't remember whether the guy came out. I don't think he did. I think just on the basis of the drawing, they gave me the permit. And so it's not as hard as it may seem. Step one, go to the Fish and Wildlife website, fill out the notification form, and then you will be notified as to whether your alteration will require an agreement. Not all notifications require an agreement, only the biggies. I just want to go back to the last slide. If you do fill out a notification form, you can print it out, and if you are visited by the law enforcement officials and there happens to be a Fish and Wildlife agent along, having that documentation to show them is not only evidence of an attempt at good faith compliance, but it's an official looking piece of paper that will take you a lot further than having nothing to say when they ask you if you're compliant. Here's the phone number for the local DFW office, 441-2075. You can also Google Fish and Wildlife, Eureka, California. And the fellow they have a single enforcement agent for Humboldt County pertaining to marijuana cultivation. He's a nice guy. He will answer your questions anonymously about whether your diversion is going to trigger an enforcement action. Let's move on to grading. The enforcement agency in Humboldt is the Humboldt County Building Department. The trigger for the threshold is 50 cubic yards. How much is that? That's 10 cubic yards. A standard sized dump truck holds 10 cubic yards, so 5 dump trucks. If you're going to be grading 5 of these worth of soil, you're going to need a permit. Let's go back to the last slide. Okay. So there's 2 kinds of grading permits. The first is for if you're going to move 5,000 cubic yards or less, which would be 500 dump trucks. And believe it or not, that's not that much soil. If you are visited by law enforcement, they're going to try to eyeball it and figure out if you needed a permit. And if it looks like you moved more than 50 or 5 dump truck loads, they're going to ask you for where your permit is. So the less than 5,000 cubic yards, between 50 and 5,000, is called regular grading. Again, these, just like the 1602 permit, you can hand draw the plans with a pencil. That's pretty much all it takes. They're going to look it over. They're not going to file it away. They will check it out. It may prompt a visit from the building inspector, the same guy who inspects structures for permits, and they may just tell you send a permit out, but it's worthwhile giving them a buzz beforehand and describing what you're going to need to do, and just listen to what they tell you. We're going to go on to the engineered grading permit in the next slide, but typically for the regular grading permit, the building official may require a professional inspection and testing by a soils engineer if he has cause to believe that adverse geologic factors may be involved. For larger than 5,000 cubic yards, that's going to trigger the need for a bigger permit called engineered grading. This is where you bring in a group like Pacific Watershed Associates or a similar engineering firm, because your grading plan is going to need to be prepared by one of their civil engineers. You're going to also need one of their staffers to prepare a soils engineering report pertaining to the top layer of soil, and a geology report for everything underneath the top layer of soil. So when you go and employ the resources of an engineering firm, what are you paying for? You're having an engineer come out to do a site visit and draw up the plans to ensure that the grading is performed according to the best practices. And that takes into account slope steepness, site stability and potential for liquefaction, soil type and depth, proximity to watercourses, compaction of backfill and cast-off material, finished contours, etc. And that suitable mitigation and erosion control methods such as buttress fills, straw wattles at the toes of cuts, and culverts and drainage channels and check dams are employed where necessary. Ultimately, it can also save you money in the long run because it contributes to the value, longevity, and stability of the built structures on your property. You can read the Humboldt County Grading Ordinance. It's online. If you Google the Humboldt County Building Department, there's a link that you just click and you can read the entire grading ordinance right there. I took this out from it. One of the sentences is, the slope of cut surfaces shall be no steeper than 50% unless the permittee furnishes a soils and engineering or geology report or both. Here's the number for the Humboldt County Building Department to ask anonymous questions. The number is 445-7245. There's a inspector there on duty during all business hours to answer anonymous questions, and they won't trace your call. He's very helpful. Moving along to the last section of compliance today, this pertains to residences, ponds, outbuildings, and that type of thing. The agency is the Humboldt County Building Department, the same people who do the grading permits. They also permit ponds. If the pond is going to be larger, Basically, for ponds, they default to the grading ordinance as there's no specific pond ordinance that details what are the standards for requiring a permit. So essentially, if to dig your pond, you're going to be moving more than 5 dump trucks worth of soil, you're going to need to do a plot plan that can be hand-drawn, and if it's less than 5,000 cubic yards of soil, it's likely that the plot plan that's hand-drawn will do the trick, unless there's some tricky issues going on like steepness, unstable slope, liquefaction issues, or that kind of thing. And if your pond is going to be a large pond, larger than 5,000 cubic yards, you will need an engineered grading permit. The building department will still want to know about how the pond is going to be filled and if the diversion is to be from a creek or spring. And so that's going to trigger the water diversion permits. And so this is why all of these things kind of work together. The Humboldt County Building Department will do a mandatory notification to the state, not regional water board, and Fish and Wildlife to make sure that you're in compliance for the water permits if you tell them that you're diverting from off your property or from a stream that leaves your property that originates there. And they will also make sure that you're in compliance with streamside management area requirements of the county zoning code, and that the streamside management pertains to buffer zones around creeks. Water tanks, we touched on this a little bit ago. 5,000 gallons or more require a permit, although some larger than 5,000 gallons have been permitted as a residual part of an alternative owner building project, like a residence. What happens if you don't get a building permit for a structure or a pond? If anyone calls in a complaint to the building department at any time thereafter, they will send out an enforcement agent at some point, and that person can access your land without a search warrant, and you could get red tagged. The tag's actually forest green. A red tag requires you to respond to the building department to remediate the violation. 3 red tags gets referral as a nuisance to the county code enforcement agent, who can bring legal action against you, which may include a requirement to demolish a structure or fill an illegal pond and repair damage caused by erosion. At that point, you'll be calling our good friends at Pacific Watershed Associates. Anecdotally, I heard by and by that there are over 6,000 red-tagged structures in Humboldt County. There's a single code enforcement agent for the county, and so practically speaking, getting your residence or a shed red-tagged is not going to mean the bulldozer is showing up in the next week. But it is cause for concern, especially if you move to sell that property later on and you have a red-tagged structure on it. Here's our final slide. The Humboldt County Building and Planning Department website has some great how-to links, such as how to apply for a residential building permit, land use requirements, plot plan checklist. I went through these myself when I was hand-drawing my plot plan example, and all of the alternative owner building information that you need. And that wraps up my presentation.